As a data management architect here at Informatica, one of the most common questions that I hear from customers is, how do we connect to the cloud? Now, typically we'll hear this from customers who already have an existing ETL solution in place, and maybe they've been doing some on-premise data warehousing use cases for a while, and now they're really starting for the first time to venture into the cloud. So they're starting to use AWS, maybe Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, or they may be using all three, which is pretty common. But this idea, this concept of taking a traditional ETL solution and just connecting to the cloud, while it does work for some limited use cases, it's actually a fairly common mistake that we see teams making as they move to the cloud, and it can lead to a few different headaches further down the road. So let me explain why that is. We'll just take a look at an existing traditional ETL use case. So data warehousing scenario, we have a data center and we have, let's say, a number of databases, maybe have some apps, and we've also got some files. And the ETL is the execution engine, right? So we have that installed inside this data center, and we're doing bidirectional connections into these sources and targets, handling the processing here and then pushing it into the target. And that's all well and good, right? That's a tried and tested pattern. It's been done for years. It works really well in this data center. But what happens when we add in a second data center? So here I've got the same sort of setup, right? I've got databases, I have apps and files. And at this point, I've got a couple of different choices. The first thing I could do is I could stick with using this ETL solution here, and I could get creative with networking. What I mean by that is we could have some sort of tunneling solution or a VPC, so we can treat this as an extended part of the network. But what we find typically is these tend to be quite slow, especially for large volume data warehousing and things like that. So the other thing that I could do is I could have a second ETL instance here, and obviously that gives me the ability to do connectivity to these local sources, but it doesn't give me a very good solution for handling transfer of data between these data centers here, especially where there are multiple hops involved, multiple sources involved. So how can I, well actually, and also to complicate things a little bit further, imagine that this is AWS, right? So, or any of the other cloud providers. So obviously there's a lot more considerations in moving to the cloud than just treating it as a second data center. But from a networking standpoint, that's exactly what it is. So I still don't really have a good solution, right? I mean, if I've got to move data from here to here, am I going to have a second instance of my ETL solution actually installed inside the cloud environment? Or am I going to use this one? If I'm using this one, I'm pulling all of that data down, processing it here, and then pushing it straight back up to where it's just come from. And in the cloud, that can be pretty expensive. So what can we do differently? Well, this is really where the concept of iPaaS comes into play. And if you've not heard the term before, it's Integration Platform as a Service. And for Informatica, that's IICS, which is Informatica Intelligent Cloud Services. So what we've been able to do in the iPaaS solution is to separate out design from execution. And so you log in through your web browser, everything's designed as in a single user experience here, all through the web browser, and then you decide where you want to have execution happening. Because we have this execution engine called a secure agent. And it's a self-managing, self-updating, self-maintaining execution engine that securely connects outbound over port 443 to our iPaaS solution. And always the communication is initiated outbound, so we're not having to poke any holes in the firewall or anything like that. And these can run in groups, in runtime groups of any number. And that provides high availability and load balancing as well. And this can obviously connect locally to these same data sources that I had before, apps, my files, and so on. And they connect locally to those. But the beauty of this is when we add in AWS here, or Azure, what we can do is we can have execution happening closest to the source and target. So I could use this secure agent group to take data from a database here and send it via the most secure route possible directly into S3, for example. But then I could have another secure agent group here that would then handle all of the movement from this staging area into, let's say, my analytics, right? And we're also automatically using pushdown optimization so that you can do, instead of ETL, you're doing ELT, extract, load, and then do the transformation here. And you can have as many of these secure agent groups as you need. You could have a second data center, for example, here, and you still only have one central management and design solution to think about. Execution can happen wherever you need it to. So when you're thinking about your next project, just think, if you've got cloud hybrid scenarios that you need to solve for, just think about this separation from between design and execution. You also need to think about broad support for use cases, so broad pattern and connectivity support, and also rock solid security. And we'll cover those in later videos. Thanks very much.